UFC Vegas 86 was just not a very good card. On paper, it was pretty solid. On paper, it was better than UFC Vegas 85. But in execution, we had a bunch of young guys that were too scared to actually fight, a bunch of people that were too scared to try to win and were just trying not to lose, and the fights just did not deliver. Obviously, there were some highlights, but overall, a pretty mediocre card. But thankfully, we are heading into a very solid pay-per-view. Luckily for us, even though the fights weren't great, the bets were. Jacob and I put up some very solid profits for premium members. I gave you 22% ROI. Jacob gave you 25% ROI. Jacob's underdog lock of the week hit, and my premium member only safety parlay hit. The odds were adjusted. We went from minus 117 to minus 265, and that's because it was Daniel Marcos and Carlos Prates. Daniel Marcos, as we all know, that fight was a no contest. We'll talk about that in a second. And Carlos Prates, thank God that hit. I mean, I was sweating this one out, and I was furious at myself for making this a safety parlay. And I dodged a couple of bullets because the original safety parlay was going to be Joey P., the Philly fraud, and Bellagioki. But the Bellagioki fight fell through. The bet, that just didn't happen. And now I put together this safety parlay, and this did happen. And I'm going to go ahead and thank whoever's up there for that because it was dicey. But if you want to unlock the premium member safety parlay and all the bets and everything else that we do for UFC 298, you can do that right now at WeWantPicks.com. Just click Become a Member at the top. You're going to unlock picks, bets, tools, round line leans, everything you could literally ever want or need heading into a fight week. And this is the fourth card of 2024. This is the fourth card of Big Time Profits, the fourth card of a safety parlay hitting, the fourth card of solid delivery. WeWantPicks.com. Click Become a Member at the top. Let's talk about that Daniel Marcos fight. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because there's not a ton to talk about. Daniel looked good. Daniel looked like the original Daniel. He wasn't tentative. He was a little more aggressive. He was having a ton of success. And I can't speak to Aoriqileng's genitalia. I can't speak to the pain that Aoriqileng may or may not have been in. But I can say Daniel Marcos was dominating that fight, and it looked like Aoriqileng could have continued and chose not to. It is what it is. I wasn't in that position, so I don't know. Maybe he's running around with a Drake, and the cup just can't contain that beast. And then you look at it wrong and it hurts. Maybe. But Daniel Marcos, the point, the takeaway, what we can gather from this is that Daniel Marcos is better than that last fight. He's better than his previous fight where he was just backing up, couldn't get his hands going, barely squeaked out a decision. He looked good. He had forward pressure, solid striking. He looked good. He looked like the undefeated prospect that a lot of people think he is. So we'll see what his next matchup is. And the UFC seems to be doing him a favor. And it's interesting because the UFC is not saying, here's a young prospect. Here's a guy that has put together a whole bunch of wins. He's undefeated. Give him an old veteran that he can beat. They haven't done that yet. They're like, here's a couple of mid-level guys. Here's some talent, but not dangerous guys that you can go out there and you can beat up and you can get better on. And that's how they should be building talent. And I think they're doing a good job with Daniel Marcos, so we'll see what happens. We'll see what his next fight looks like. Not a fade. Now, if he came out and this was going to be a second fight in a row where he was tentative, he was gun-shy, he would be another, all right, this guy's probably not as good as we thought he was, but that's not the case. I do think he is good. I think the pressure was there, the striking was there, everything was there, including a foul, which is why we had that no contest. Another lock of the week hits for Jacob. So Bogdan Guskov, I picked him. Jacob made him his underdog lock of the week, and it had everything to do with Zach Pauga and not much to do with Bogdan Guskov. At least on my side of things. I can't speak to Jacob's logic, but on my side of things, I said Zach Pauga, that guy that we saw go into the Ultimate Fighter house and make it to the finale, the guy we saw before the UFC is not the guy we have in the UFC. He gets to the UFC, doesn't seem to care. No sense of urgency. Doesn't work. The takedowns are almost non-existent. And then, Bogdan Guskov didn't have a successful UFC debut, but he fought a hammer. And he came in here, showcased that power, got this done. I did miss the bet on this fight. The bet on this fight was over 1.5 because I thought Pauga's chin would be a little better and he would just do nothing. Turns out he would do nothing, but his chin wasn't good. So Jacob and I were heads up on this bet. And Jacob and I were heads up on a few bets, and somehow we both ended up doing well. Either way, Bogdan Guskov has shown the power, has shown that he can get a UFC win, but we don't know yet if he's good. We don't know yet if he's UFC caliber good. We do know he can knock out a guy that isn't UFC caliber. And great, that's what he was supposed to do. He came in here, got the knockout, and he said getting your first UFC win is better than sex. Which I imagine, yeah. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, sex doesn't last very long. And that first UFC win is forever. So good for Bogdan Guskov, and I think Zach Pauga's he has to make some changes. I don't know if it's life changes, gym change. He's got to change something here because he has all the talent and none of the execution. And let's go ahead and talk about that Philly team. I think it's Renzo Gracie Philly. And I don't know if Joe Pyfer is there full-time or part-time or what, but I'm going to put both of these guys in that category. And we're going to talk about the coaching because Jeremiah Wells has all the talent. Jeremiah Wells should have won this fight on talent alone. I didn't watch this fight live, but I knew the result and I watched it. And when I watched it, knowing the result, of course, it can skew your vision because I know the result. I'm looking at something that has already happened. But it also gave me the opportunity to really focus on Jeremiah Wells. And luckily, I didn't have a bet on him. And I know he was a big guy to bet this week. A lot of people super confident. I was confident in him. Thankfully, my only bet on this was over 1.5, and that did hit. But Jeremiah Wells has power in his hands. Jeremiah Wells has pretty good cardio. Jeremiah Wells has fantastic wrestling, and Jeremiah Wells has very good jiu-jitsu, and he still lost this fight. And I don't think he lost this fight because of his abilities. Of course, Max Griffin is tough. We knew he was going to be tough. But Jeremiah had some success with the striking. At one point, looked like he stung Max pretty good. At one point, Jeremiah got stung, but he shook it off and he kept coming. I think that first round was razor thin, and the last second takedown by Max Griffin probably shored it up. You could have gone Jeremiah Wells. This fight was basically identical statistic-wise, so I'm not going to complain about the judging. That's why this says bad coaching and not bad judging. First round, razor thin. Second round, very clear round for Jeremiah Wells. And the third round, what did Jeremiah do? Basically nothing. And I'm saying bad coaching because I get the impression that Jeremiah Wells sat on that stool, was starting to slow down, and his coaches told him, you're up 2 rounds. You're up 2 rounds. You're winning this fight. So he came out in the third round and didn't do anything because he thought he won this fight. All he had to do was not get finished, and he would have won 2 rounds to 1. He would have won a 29-28 decision, and he did nothing in that third round. But that's not what happened, is it? He lost this fight. A very razor-thin fight. He could have won. That poor decision-making could have worked out for him. And I do think this is the coach's fault. Obviously, Jeremiah's the one in there. He's a professional fighter. He should have the wherewithal to fight hard every minute of every round. And even if you're not going to take chances, which I totally understand, why would you take chances if you're up 2 rounds to nothing? But he doesn't have to do nothing. He should continue to move forward, continue to try to win. And I get the impression that somebody told him that he was up 2-0. And if somebody didn't tell him he was up 2-0, at the very least, they should have told him it comes down to this round. You need to win this round. You need to pressure forward. You need to go all in on the wrestling. This is what we train for. You have the cardio. You need to win this round or you will lose this fight. And that's how frank they needed to be with him. And I don't think they were. So I will blame the coaches for this loss. Obviously, every single fighter inside the cage has to carry a majority of the blame. But in this case, it wasn't Jeremiah's skill set that lost him his fight. It was his sense of urgency in the third round. And I think that was a direct reflection of the corner. Because when you're in there and you're in that fight, you don't necessarily know everything that's going on. And we have seen plenty of fighters absolutely delusional about what's happening in there. But the coaches, the corner, should not be. They're watching that fight. They're watching every single minute, every single second of that fight intently, and it is their job to get their fighter ready for the next round. It is their job to make sure that their fighter knows what's going on and knows what they need to do to win. I blame the coaches for this one. I'll say it's 70-30 blame because Jeremiah Wells, of course, he's the one in there. He carries 30% of this blame. But the coaches were not in his face or in his ear letting him know the reality of this situation. He has now lost 2 in a row in the UFC. Which tells me Jeremiah Wells won all of those previous fights on just guts and raw skill set alone and not with a good game plan. Here's that scorecard. First round, 2 judges gave it to Max. 1 judge gave it to Jeremiah. Close round, the takedown was probably the difference. Second round, very clear for Jeremiah. And the third round, very clear loss. And when I say very, this fight was so freaking close. And it was a split decision. It should have been a split decision. And I don't think you can say robbery in either direction. But I do blame the coaches for this. They were the ones that should have given him that sense of urgency and given him the reality check he needed to go out there and force some pressure in the third round and get that win. Sal D'Amato, Sally boy, he's always the one on the other side of the split decision. That's what we had here. Let's talk about Balaji. This card was loaded. I think 4. We had 4 UFC debut and contender series guys. 4 of them. All 4 of them look spectacular in the contender series. And all 4 of them did not look good. They just did not look good in their actual fights. Balaji, I had a full unit bet on him. And it cashed. So no reason to be pissed off about it. But I don't think he looked that good. I think that first round, it looked like Kwamba was touching him up to me. Looked like Kwamba was the more accurate guy. Looked like Kwamba was landing. Looked like Kwamba, who is the lighter fighter, who went up a weight class on 4 days' notice, was the better striker who looked like he had better cardio, better forward pressure. Second round, a little more of the same. And listening to the commentary on this card was bizarre. We'll talk about a little bit of it with the Brad Tavares fight, but the commentary on this card was bizarre. They were seeing things that I don't think anybody else was seeing. In their mind, Balaji was ready to go. In their mind, he was setting things up. He's pasting high-level strike. I saw a guy that was backing up, turning his head, didn't like the pressure, and wasn't this incredibly high-level striker that we thought he was. I saw a guy that was getting a hard time from a 145-pounder that stepped up on short notice. And I saw a guy that when there was a takedown attempt, so yes, he typically has great takedown defense and great hips. But when his hips actually hit the mat, he had no clue what to do. No idea what to do. Made mistake after mistake after mistake and gave that up. So what I will say, this is not an indictment on Balaji. He's a young guy early in his career. So a lot of this has to do with how good is Kwamba that he stepped up on short notice and got this done. And if you remember, he won his contender series fight. He just didn't get the contract. Dana White didn't think it was exciting enough. Fine, I get it. But I think if we're looking at the two of these guys, I think Kwamba may have the better career. Because at least in this fight, he seemed like the more polished guy. He seemed to be the more accurate guy. And yes, of course, he lost this fight, and I think it was a very fair loss. I think Balaji did what he needed to do in the third round with the pressure, with the pace, finally started throwing his hands a little bit. But once you factor in the short notice and the step up, I think Kwamba is good, and I think we're going to learn a lot about Balaji. I don't know if he's just okay or if he's very good and the short notice switch up of opponent and the pressure of a first UFC fight. I don't know. It is always hard to tell with the very first fight in the UFC for a lot of these guys. The second fight is where we get a view into how good they are or are not, because that's when the nerves are gone and that's when, okay, I've been here. I got it out of my way. Either way, Balaji got it done. That bet cashed for us. Balaji showed that he can be good, but he was a little too gun shy. The ability to grapple, almost non-existent. But the highlight here is Kwamba. Kwamba looked fantastic. I think he had pinpoint accuracy early in the strikes. And obviously short notice. And while I am saying and repeating over and over he went up in weight, which he did, he's a 45-pounder, he didn't look smaller in there. So he must be massive at 145 pounds. But either way, fight was not great. It was a little tense. I think we need to see a little bit more of these guys to know how good they are or are not. But if I learned a lesson on this card, so I made my money, we put up some units of profit, but if I learned my lesson on this card, remember last year the whole theme was contender series fade the contender series guys. I may have to, and I hated that narrative last year. That might be a narrative this year because all of these contender series guys sort of shit the bed a little bit. Speaking of, Carlos Prates, he ended up being the only leg of the safety parlay because that no contest in the Daniel Marcos fight. But Jacob's analysis of this was perfect. Jacob's analysis was he's going to do nothing until he does something. He's going to be losing until he wins. And that's basically what happened. My biggest issue with Carlos Prates, full fade going forward. Full fade. And that might sound ridiculous because of the result, the wild knockout that he got. But watch that fight. What did he do? My notes on him, anytime I'm able to sit down and watch the fights live on my script, if you will, in my spreadsheet where I have all my notes for every single fighter, I write down my raw feelings at the time. My raw notes for Carlos Prates during that fight, and excuse me, I'm about to curse, was do nothing pussy who has big power. And that's, I mean, he would knock me out if we fought, so hard to say that, I guess. But the reality is, what did this guy do? He didn't do anything. And then if you want to say, well, he's a counter striker. He was waiting, and then he eventually landed the big punch and knocked him out. Correct. But go back and watch, dude. Trevin Giles is throwing 1-2s, and Carlos Prates not only is turning his head and flinching, he's backing up. I have never seen somebody that has a Muay Thai tattoo across their chest less willing to fight. He looked scared. He looked like he had never... Now, technique-wise, the striking was there, but his defense turns his head, flinches, backed up, ran away. This dude wanted nothing to do with that fight. It makes no sense. He has a tattoo across his skull. I don't know anybody who has a tattoo across their skull that backs up and flinches when a fight happens. Trevin Giles was winning this with a 1-2 and low volume on his. He didn't even use his famous jab. If he used his jab, he would have given Carlos big issues. So the takeaway is Carlos Prates has huge power and hates pressure. So if we get somebody with a decent chin and solid forward pressure, Prates is done. And maybe, like with the Balaji fight, maybe with some UFC jitters, didn't really let his hands go or his legs go because he's 90% kicks because of the stars of the Apex, which is basically a regional show. But man, this was a nail biter. I was furious at myself for him being in the safety parlay. Then he knocked out Trevin Giles, and now I'm going to brag about the safety parlay for a full week, telling people it's only $10 a month. What are you, stupid? So prepare for that. But Carlos Prates, man, holy shit. Imagine being that talented and that afraid to get hit by a punch. Makes no sense. Speaking of people not afraid to get hit by punches, speaking of people who are not do-nothing pussies, we got Robocop. I mean, Gregory Rodriguez is the real deal. And we have known this. It's not a surprise that Gregory Rodriguez can knock people out. It's not a surprise that he can take people down. What is a surprise is how good he was at all of those things this entire time. He weaved it together well. We hadn't really seen that before. We'd seen him grapple. We've seen him strike. We haven't seen him perfectly execute I'm going to charge at you, I'm going to throw big punches, then I'm going to go to a takedown. And he had big, clean takedowns. And he beat Brad Tavares bell to bell, all 3 rounds, and then finally finished him in the 3rd. But the most bizarre part was the commentary. Did you guys pick up on the comment? I don't know if Brad's family paid them or what, but their whole commentary while Brad Tavares is getting lit up was, at any moment, Brad Tavares, you can see, look at him. Look at his position. At any moment, he can knock out Gregory Rodriguez. And then we're hearing, it doesn't matter. In the 3rd round, Brad Tavares has that big power. And it doesn't matter how much you're winning because Brad Tavares can knock you out late in the 3rd round. Dude, Brad Tavares is the least dangerous middleweight on the roster. That was the weirdest commentary I've heard. Brad Tavares, a legend, tried and true, has fought the entire middleweight division, 2 generations worth. But he's not dangerous. His last finish was in 2018. He has 2 finishes out of like 20-something UFC fights. So for them to spend 12 minutes of a 15-minute fight talking about any second now, Brad Tavares is going to knock out Gregory Rodriguez was an absurd take, and they all were agreeing. It made absolutely no sense to me. And what's annoying is they kept that narrative going. So what does it do? It takes away from the masterpiece that Gregory Rodriguez was putting together. All of a sudden, This guy is in the conversation, and we knew he could strike. We knew he could grapple, and as I mentioned, we had not seen him do both at the same time. We had not seen him carry this power late into the third round. We have not seen him have as good of a card. This is the best he has ever looked against the most durable guy he has ever fought. So Gregory Rodriguez, I think they said he officially has the most amount of finishes since 2020 at middleweight, and I get it. This guy just didn't stop coming forward, didn't stop attempting takedowns, didn't stop throwing big punches. Gregory Rodriguez is the real deal, and I'm looking forward to his next fight. Another contender series guy that just didn't do enough. And this was a weird fight because of the 2 early fouls in the first round. I think we had a nut shot and an eye poke early. The first round took like 9 minutes because of all the breaks. But Robert Burchak didn't do anything. And I'm not going to call him a pussy because he's not. He tried to win that third round. He came forward. He tried to win that third round. So he didn't just fold and didn't back up and wasn't. When Robert Burchak goes back and he watches this and he's going to get mad at himself because how can, of course you're going to be mad at yourself. What I will say is, I don't think it was anything he did wrong in the moment. I think the issue is his skill set is limited. He's a good, clean boxer. And that's where it ends. I don't think he threw a single kick. I don't think he faked a kick. He does fake takedowns, but at a certain point, unless you actually shoot one, nobody's worried about it. So he's a clean boxer who came into mixed martial arts and doesn't mix any of the martial arts. And then Ihor Potieria, who historically was a chinny guy with no cardio but plenty of striking, had plenty of cardio, very versatile striking, and took this fight no problem. No problem whatsoever. So good win for Ihor Potieria. This weight class makes a lot more sense for him. His cardio existed for more than 2 minutes, which we had not seen from him. But I think Robert Burchak needs to go back and add skills to his skill set. The boxing's good. The boxing's clean. You need to start kicking people. You need to start shooting takedowns. Real takedowns, not body locks against the cage. Real takedowns. Because until you shoot a real takedown, nobody is going to believe your feints. Why would I worry about your feint if I just spent 5 minutes with you in the cage and you didn't actually shoot a takedown? So this is not an indictment on what he did inside the cage, like Carlos Prates, backing up, afraid. Belagioki, too gun shy, not really throwing. That's not the case here. Burchak has the skills. He moved forward. He tried to win with the skills he has. He just needs to add more. This is mixed martial arts. And unless you're a phenomenal wrestler, it's very hard to be good at one single thing and have some success. So Robert Burchak will beat anybody that'll stand in front of him, and he's going to have a hard time with people that mix in true mixed martial arts techniques. And in this case, the kicks were the problem. Because look at the range. Look at the distance. Look at how long Ihor Potieria's leg is. How is Robert going to get there? How is he going to hit Ihor in the face with boxing only? He can't. And that was the story of this fight. Let's go ahead and talk about Joe Pyfer, and is he a Philly fraud? That's a narrative. That's Jacob's narrative, and it has been Jacob's narrative for a long time. So much, though, that in his media day, Joe Pyfer, angry at the world, talking very specifically about Jacob without saying his name. There's people out there throwing shade at the gym, and I get it now. I get why Jacob has been shading this gym. And unfortunately, Jacob said Joe Pyfer was not like the rest of those guys. Here's Jacob's issue with the Renzo Gracie Philly gym. His whole thing was they can grapple, but they can't strike. They are phenomenal grapplers, but they have not improved their striking at all. You can watch every single one of those fights, whether it's Sabatini, whether it's Wells. You can watch every single one of their fighters, Sean Brady. And they all are phenomenal grapplers, and their striking has not improved one iota in their entire UFC tenure. That was Jacob. This is Jacob speaking. That was Jacob's take. And then this week, he said, but Joe Pyfer is the exception to that rule. He's got great striking. We know he's got good wrestling. We know his grappling is going to be great because that whole team has great grappling. But then he went out there, and this was the fight. In my opinion, I do not think Joe Pyfer's a fraud. I don't. I think Joe Pyfer has all the skills to be very good. But he definitely needs to make some team changes and some mindset adjustments. So, breakdown of the fight. Joe looked great in the first round. Joe looked pretty good in the second round. And then the jab was a major issue for him. Apparently, Joe Pyfer is all gas, all offense, and no defense. He doesn't move his head at all. Every single half a jab that grappler Jack Hermansson threw at him snapped his head back. Every single jab snapped Joe's head back. Those little calf kicks lit up Joe's leg. That's a technique gap. Joe needs to work on the striking defense. I think him and his team are so impressed, so proud of the power he possesses, which is obviously real. Jack Hermansson literally said, Joe Pyfer is the hardest puncher I've ever fought. But it needed to be more than just power because he didn't knock him out. And he was blocking like this. And Joe just kept winging it and kept winging it. And to Joe's credit, the reason he's not a fraud is he tried to win that fight. That fifth round, clearly that fight was coming down to that fifth round. He moved forward and he threw. He tried to win that fight. So no, he's not a fraud. He's not, and people throw him in parlays and then he loses and then it's like, this guy sucks. I don't believe in any of that. What I will say is he clearly was not ready for this fight. He wasn't ready for somebody durable because he got somebody durable and he had no answer for the durability. And that will come with time. That will come with experience. He's got the skills. He needs to improve the wrestling a bit. And what was bizarre to me is he had great wrestling entries. He was there and then he didn't finish. And I think maybe he didn't want it on the ground and he was just wrestling to get that jab out of his face. That must have been the case because he never attempted to finish those takedowns. He had great entries and he had body locks and he would just push it right to the cage and hang out there. So it must have been, I don't want to be on the ground with Jack Hermansson, but I need to get this jab out of my face, so this is what I'm going to do. My issue is with his coaches. The corner was, it was basically cheerleading. Come on, Joe, this will change your life. You got to go win. That's what it was. The only piece of actual coaching advice was don't let him get comfortable. And that's a very fair thing to say. A very fair thing to say. But saying don't let him get comfortable and this will change your life. Joe needed more in that moment. He needed more. They needed to change something. Because clearly the tides had turned. Clearly things were not working well for him. And then they're leaving this guy up there in the biggest fight of his entire career to make adjustments live in the cage on his own without his corner's advice. So he's going out there. His head's getting snapped back because he's got no striking defense. He's winging big power because he knows he has big power. And he's trying to figure out, why is my leg getting chopped? Why can't I get out of this jab? And there's no actual advice other than don't let him be comfortable. Well, I'm trying not to let him be comfortable. I'm moving forward and my head is getting snapped back with a jab. And every time I plant, my calf gets kicked. They didn't make any actual adjustments. And I think Joe needs to explore potentially going to a different gym because he is very talented. He is very good and he could be something big. I do believe in that power. But you got to be more than just power. And none of this is an indictment on Joe. You show up to a gym knowing nothing. And it's the gym's responsibility to get you better. And they have gotten him as far as they can get him. You'll see my Newtown hoodie here. I coached youth wrestling. Before I moved to Texas, I coached youth wrestling for an insanely long time. I was there from the beginning. My town, Newtown, Connecticut, we did not have a youth wrestling team. I was coaching the high school. And then one of the dads came to me and said, hey, we're never going to be good unless we have a youth team. Come with me, leave the high school, let's start a youth program. So there was a couple of us, started the youth program. Sucked at first. A few years later, better. Now, I don't know how many years were removed from that, 20 or something like that. Now the Newtown Youth Wrestling Program is the biggest and most successful wrestling program in all of New England. It just is. And it has a lot to do with Coach Bray and what he created. And where I'm going with this is We have had a handful of kids go through that program, get Division I scholarships, become national champions. And we've also had a bunch of kids that were better than us and better than the team. There's one kid, I'm not going to say his name because he's, what is he, 17? Like, he's still a kid that came through the program. His dad, a big part of my martial arts. I'm not going to say my martial arts, whatever. His father got me into jiu-jitsu. Great guy. He was coaching. He was a wrestler. We got along great. His son joined the program. A beast of a kid. Started wrestling with us at 4. By like 7, we're like, he's too good for us. And so he started to train with another team. He now just announced he's going to go wrestle at Penn State. Which, if you know anything about wrestling, it is the greatest wrestling program in the history of college sports. It's not even close. And it was all because of the dad's correct decision to say, this team is great, but we've grown out of it. We are too good for this team. And it started with some cross-training, right? In the off-season, the extra days of the week. And then it was, the progress he's made is incredible. So, of course, good for you. We support you. Go be the best wrestler you could ever be. And that's what needs to happen with Joe. He needs to look around at the gym. He needs to assess the coach's skill sets, his teammates' skill sets. And he needs to say, I am the best striker here. It's not even close. I need to go somewhere where they can improve my striking. I need to go somewhere to elevate my game. And I get loyalty. And nobody's saying burn the gym. Nobody's saying go out there and shit on them. But I think we are saying you are a tremendous talent. You're only going to have probably a 5-year window, maybe even less, to do something huge in this sport. Go put yourself in the best possible position to win. Go put yourself in the best possible position to grow, to evolve, and to expand your skill sets. You don't have to burn that gym to the ground. Keep training there. Just add something else into the mix. You have outgrown your gym, and that's a perfectly normal thing to do. Only Conor McGregor accomplished what he accomplished staying at his very first gym. He's like the only one. The reason these historically successful gyms are successful is because people go there. They built some talent and then other talent came in. Look at American Top Team. How many people started as an amateur and then worked their way through? Look at Jackson Wink when that was in its heyday. Almost none of them. They created a few fighters, and then other fighters around the world were like, let me go to that gym. Let me go train with these people. And Joe needs to do that. So, no, I do not think Joe is a fraud. I think he's very good. I don't think he was ready for this fight, and I think this loss potentially is the best thing that ever happened to him. But he needs to change his mindset, because what was the very first thing he said when he got on that microphone? Oh, if you did the media stuff that I had to do, excuse, instant excuse. Oh, I was too busy doing media stuff to fight well. Okay, weird excuse. Everybody has the same media obligations, and if you have more, blame your manager. Blame your manager for booking the shit out of you in your biggest fight of your career, your first ever main event, and you're doing 10,000 media appearances when you're too tired or whatever the hell it is. Well, that's your manager's fault. Take it up with him. Then I think he wised up and realized that's a trash excuse. So then his excuse became, I got poked in the eye. He's got a video, I'm fine, blah, 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 blah. I got poked in the eye, I couldn't see. Once I couldn't see, that is what it is. To his credit, he did not say bad decision. And actually, that was spectacular of him, because it was not a bad decision. He very clearly said, I won the first 2, Jack won the next 3. So good for him. He's not delusional about bad decision, I won that fight. And maybe he'll get there, because we've seen the highs and lows. Chris Curtis is famous for that shit. We've seen the highs and lows. But he did blame it on an eye poke, which was not an eye poke. We saw it. The ref saw it. It was clearly a close-fisted punch. And I'm not doubting it messed up his vision and altered the fight. But that's what punches do. That's like complaining, well, he hit me so hard it knocked me out. That's not fair. He hit me so hard in the eye I couldn't see. That's a fight. That's what happens. So hopefully, and you can't fault the guy for having excuses instantly. Of course. How can you not? It was the biggest fight of his career. You lost. Like I couldn't imagine going through the roller coaster of emotions that he's going through. First main event, big time favorite. Everybody picking him to win. Everybody talking about his power, the Francis Ngannou thing, all of this stuff. Just to go out there and lose the way he lost. Not knocked out, not whatever. It's almost better to get knocked out instantly. Because then it's like, I got caught. To lose the way he lost, it was just worn down by a grappler with a jab. I can't imagine the emotional roller coaster he's on, and I hope he doesn't get hate. Problem is, he's got his own little YouTube channel. I shouldn't have said little. I think it's quite large. He's got his own YouTube channel, and he's going to get hate. Believe me, as a guy that's on YouTube, he's going to get hate. And hopefully, instead of being Angry Joe, which is what he was all week, but that's just going to feed the trolls. Hopefully, he's like, yeah, guys, I XYZ. So I do not think Joe Pyfer is a fraud. I think Joe Pyfer has all the skills to do something very meaningful, but he needs to go train somewhere else. He needs to learn defense. He needs to move his head. If this was Sean Strickland, and now Sean Strickland was champion of the world, so it's a big leap. But Sean Strickland's style is a nightmare for Joe. Somebody who moves forward and pumps a jab, that's a nightmare for somebody without head movement. So Joe Pyfer, I still believe in you. Got to make some different choices. Guys, unlock the safety parlay. I hit 10 of the last 11. It hits at a 72% event rate, and it has 31% lifetime ROI. This is not an accident. This is the most stable bet in this sport. It is a beacon of stability. It is like the Batman signal for bets. People are like, hey, I got my clock cleaned. A couple of events. I need something to get me back on track. And then a safety parlay goes into the clouds. There it is, the safety parlay. And I got to be careful because I almost blew it this week. So got to be careful about how hard I push the safety parlay because eventually it'll lose. And you can see that says 10 of 11. It doesn't say I've hit every single one ever. But it has been winning. It has been doing very well. And you can unlock the safety parlay not only for UFC 298, but every single card for only $10 a month. That 1 month fee will get you 4 events. WeWantPicks.com. Click Become a Member at the top. It is only $10 a month. And you're going to get more than just the beacon of stability. You're also going to get tools like the line movement tracker. This is going to give you the opening odds, the current odds, the win probability, and the line movement for every single fighter on every single card. You're also going to get detailed data, metrics, and analytics. 38 columns of information to help you find your spots, to help you identify prop bets that make sense, to help you avoid bets that don't make sense. You're going to get a DraftKings lineup optimizer, and it will be preloaded with the best DraftKings ownership projections in the world. All of that, $10 a month, WeWantPicks.com. Click Become a Member at the top. And if you want $50, we'll send you $50. Go to the website, use this link, sign up using any one of our links, make a deposit. We send you $50 as a thank you.